I was lying there in that hospital bed, my lungs burning like they were filled with hot sand, when I felt a hand touch my shoulder. I turned my head, expecting to see a nurse, but there was no one there. Absolutely no one. The room was empty, just me and those machines making their constant noises. But I swear, I felt that hand. It was soft, warm, motherly. And it was at that precise moment that my eyes fell on the nightstand next to the bed, where there was an old rosary my grandmother had left me. A rosary I didn't even remember bringing to the hospital, that had been there for days, ignored, covered in dust. Suddenly, the beads seemed to glow with their own light, and that's when everything changed in my life. Let me go back to the beginning, because this story needs to be told from the start. My name is John. I'm 42 years old. I'm a real estate agent in New York City, and until 2 months ago, I was what you might call an ordinary man. Married to Sandra for 15 years, father of 2 children, 13-year-old Raphael and 8-year-old Isabel. A busy life, full of commitments, bills to pay, dreams postponed. You know how it is. I woke up at 6 in the morning, went to work, came back late, quick dinner, helped the kids with their homework, and went to sleep. Weekends were soccer with friends or some family program at the mall. A routine that seemed perfect, but which, deep down, left me with a strange feeling of emptiness. Faith, to be honest, was something distant in my life. Not that I was an atheist, but I wasn't what you could call a practicing believer either. I went to Mass occasionally, more to keep Sandra and the kids company than out of personal conviction. I prayed when something very serious happened, those kind of half-desperate prayers, half-bargaining with God. If you help me with this, I promise that kind of thing. Deep down, I thought I could solve everything on my own, that my willpower and hard work were enough for any challenge. Everything started to change in March of this year. My grandmother, Concepcion, who had always been a very special person in my life, started to get sick. She was 87 years old and lived alone in a small house in Brooklyn. She was a woman of unwavering faith, one of those who knew the entire Bible by heart, who never missed a novena, who had a makeshift altar in her room with candles and images of saints. I always thought it was beautiful, but a little exaggerated, To me, it was something for older people, a different generation. Grandma Concepcion started to get dizzy, to forget simple things. The doctor said it was normal for her age, but I realized there was something more. She was more frail, quieter. I started visiting her more often, and it was during one of these visits that she gave me the rosary. It was an old rosary with dark wooden beads, worn by time and prayer. The crucifix was small, simple, but there was something special about it. She took my hand, placed the rosary in my palm, and said, "John, my grandson, take this with you. One day you will need it more than you can imagine." I smiled, a little awkwardly, and put the rosary in my shirt pocket. To be honest, I thought it was just an old woman's affection, wanting to leave something as a keepsake. I didn't think much about it. I took the rosary home, left it in the dresser drawer, and life continued its normal routine. Or at least that's what I thought. In April, the first symptoms started. First, a dry, persistent cough. Then came the fatigue. I thought it was stress from work. After all, the real estate market was tough. I was chasing sales, working late. Sandra was worried, told me to go to the doctor, but I always found an excuse. "Oh, it's just a cold. It'll pass. I don't have time for a doctor right now." The cough got worse. Entire nights without sleep, coughing until I tasted blood in my mouth. Sandra couldn't sleep either. She kept looking at me with that expression of someone who is scared but trying to hide it. The children began to realize that something was not right. Raphael, who was at the age of questioning everything, asked directly, "Dad, are you sick?" And I, trying to maintain normalcy, replied, "No, son, it's just a bad cough. It'll pass soon." But it didn't pass. It got worse. It was on a Thursday morning that I woke up with a high fever and a chest pain that felt like someone was squeezing my lungs with both hands. Sandra looked at me and said, "That's enough, John. You're going to the hospital with me, even if I have to drag you." And for the first time in weeks, I didn't have the strength to argue. At the hospital, the tests confirmed what I had already suspected but didn't want to admit: COVID-19. But it wasn't a simple case. My lungs were quite compromised, my oxygen saturation was low, and the doctor was blunt. "Mr. John, we're going to have to admit you. Your condition is serious." I remember looking at Sandra and seeing the fear in her eyes. She tried to be strong, held my hand and said, "Everything will be all right. You're strong. You'll be home soon." But I could see that she was terrified. The children couldn't even say goodbye properly because of the safety protocol. It was through the car window that I saw Raphael holding Isabel's hand, both of them waving, trying to smile. In a hospital room, alone, the reality hit me like a ton of bricks. There I was, a man who always thought he was in control, completely vulnerable, dependent on machines to breathe properly. The days crawled by with cruel slowness. Oxygen flowing through my nose, medication in my veins, the constant beeping of monitors, and mostly the silence. A silence that forced me to think about things I'd always avoided. It was on the second night that I started to feel real fear. Not fear of being hospitalized, not fear of losing my job, but fear of dying. Fear of never seeing my children grow up, fear of leaving Sandra alone, fear that my life had been nothing but rushing, bills, commitments, and in the end, nothing that truly mattered. I spent the whole night awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling my chest rise and fall with difficulty, listening to my own heartbeat. On the third day, Sandra brought some things from home: clean pajamas, toiletries, and among them, almost by chance, came Grandma Concepcion's rosary. She said she found it in a drawer and thought I might want to have it with me. I picked up the rosary, felt the weight of the wooden beads in my hand, and a strange sensation washed over me. It was as if my grandmother's presence was there with me. That night, my condition worsened. My fever spiked, breathing became more difficult, and the doctors started using words I didn't want to hear: intensive care, mechanical ventilation, serious condition. I was terrified, more terrified than I had ever been in my life. And that's when I picked up the rosary. At first, I didn't know how to pray. It had been decades since I'd said a full rosary. I started clumsily, trying to remember the prayers Grandma Concepcion had taught me as a child. "Hail Mary, full of grace." The words came out a little jumbled, a little forgotten, but they came out. And with each bead I passed between my fingers, I felt something strange happening. It was as if each Hail Mary was a conversation. Not a memorized prayer, but a real conversation. I talked about my fear, about my family, about how I had been a man distant from faith, about how I wanted a second chance to be better, to be truly present in the lives of the people I loved. And here, if you're following this story and it's touching your heart in some way, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel, because stories like this, stories of faith, transformation, of miracles that happen every day, they need to be shared. They need to reach people who, just like I was at that moment, need to know that they are not alone. On the fourth night, something extraordinary happened. I was praying the rosary. It was almost midnight, and the hospital was in that heavy silence of the early morning. Suddenly, I felt like I wasn't alone in the room anymore. It wasn't a frightening feeling. On the contrary, it was comforting. It was as if someone very dear had entered the room and sat beside me. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder, a gentle, warm hand that conveyed a peace I had never felt in my life. I turned to look, but there was no one there. The room was empty, just me and the machines. But I knew someone was there. I felt the presence as if it were something physical. My eyes fell on the rosary in my hands. and it was as if I was seeing it for the first time. The beads seemed to have their own light, a soft, golden light that came from nowhere. The crucifix seemed sharper, more real, and it was at that moment that I heard it. It wasn't an external voice. It wasn't anything my ears picked up. It was an inner voice, clear as crystal, that said, "I am here, my son. I have always been." And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that it was Our Lady speaking to me. I don't know how I knew. I can't explain it rationally, but I knew. Tears started rolling down my face. They weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of an emotion so profound that there are no words to describe it. I felt that all the prayers I was saying, all the Hail Marys I was reciting haltingly, were being heard. More than that, they were being answered. That night, for the first time since I had arrived at the hospital, I slept soundly. I woke up the next day with a different feeling. The fever had subsided, breathing was easier, and there was a peace in my heart that I had never experienced. The doctors were surprised by the sudden improvement. "It's impressive," said Dr. Carlos, my pulmonologist. "Last night your condition was quite worrying, and today you are visibly better." I smiled and clutched the rosary in my hand. I knew that this was not just coincidence or the effectiveness of the medication. There was something more, something that medicine couldn't explain, but that my heart understood perfectly. From that day on, my recovery was impressive. With each passing day, I felt stronger, closer to being discharged from the hospital. But more important than the physical healing, what was happening within me. I was discovering a faith I didn't know existed within me. A faith not based on fear or bargaining with God, but on love, gratitude, and trust. I spoke with the hospital chaplain, Father Anthony, a simple, wise man who visited the patients. I told him about my experience with the rosary, about the presence I felt, about the inner voice. He listened attentively and said something I'll never forget. "John, Our Lady has many ways of manifesting herself. Sometimes it's in a grand apparition. Sometimes it's in a seemingly simple coincidence. Sometimes it's through an object that carries the love and prayers of someone dear. What matters isn't how she comes, but how we receive her." That's when I understood the true meaning of that rosary. It wasn't just a religious object my grandmother gave me. It was a channel of love, a connecting thread linking me to generations of faith, to all the prayers my Grandma Concepcion had offered throughout her life, to all the requests for protection she'd made for me since I was born. That rosary carried a history, carried love, carried the faith of a woman who always believed that God cares for each of us. I was discharged on the 10th day. When I left the hospital, I carried with me not only Grandma Concepcion's rosary, but a profound transformation. I was no longer the same man who had entered. I was no longer the John who thought he could solve everything alone, who lived chasing after things that ultimately didn't matter that much. The reunion with my family was emotional. Sandra cried so much I thought she'd dehydrate. The children threw themselves into my arms and wouldn't let go. Raphael, who has always been more reserved, whispered in my ear, "Dad, I prayed for you every day to get better." And little Isabel, with that childlike sincerity, said, "Daddy, you look different. Your eyes are brighter." And she was right. I was different. The hospital experience had transformed me in a way I never imagined possible. I returned to work, but with a completely new perspective. I remained a real estate agent. I continued to have responsibilities and commitments, but now I knew what truly mattered. I knew that family comes first, that health is a gift that cannot be neglected, that each day is an opportunity to be grateful and to be better. I started praying the rosary every night. At first, Sandra was surprised to see me there in the room, rosary in hand, but soon she began praying with me. And then the children joined in. Today, our family has the habit of praying the rosary together at least 3 times a week. It's not an obligation,
It's not a burden. It's a moment of unity, gratitude, and peace. My grandmother Concepcion was very moved when I told her about what happened in the hospital. She held my hands, looked into my eyes with that wise look of someone who has lived a long life, and said, "I knew, my grandson, I always knew, that one day you would need that rosary, and Our Lady was waiting for you to ask her for help." That's when she told me the history of that rosary. It had belonged to her great-grandmother, passed down from mother to daughter through generations. It had accompanied difficult births, serious illnesses, moments of despair and joy. Each bead had been touched by hands that prayed with faith, that asked for protection, that gave thanks for miracles received. When she gave me the rosary, it wasn't a casual gesture. It was the continuation of a tradition of faith that now reached me. I was discharged on the 10th day. When I left the hospital, I carried with me not only Grandma Concepcion's rosary, but a profound transformation. I was no longer the same man who entered. I was no longer the John who thought he could solve everything alone, who lived chasing after things that ultimately didn't matter that much. The reunion with my family was emotional. Sandra cried so much I thought she'd dehydrate. The children threw themselves into my arms and wouldn't let go. Raphael, who has always been more reserved, whispered in my ear, "Dad, I prayed for you every day to get better." And little Isabel, with that childlike sincerity, said, "Daddy, you look different. Your eyes are brighter." And she was right. I was different. The hospital experience had transformed me in a way I never imagined possible. I returned to work, but with a completely new perspective. I remained a real estate agent. I continued to have responsibilities and commitments, but now I knew what truly mattered. I knew that family comes first, that health is a gift that cannot be neglected, that each day is an opportunity to be grateful and to be better. I started praying the rosary every night. At first, Sandra was surprised to see me there in the room, rosary in hand. But soon, she began praying with me. And then the children joined in. Today, our family has the habit of praying the rosary together at least 3 times a week. It's not an obligation, it's not a burden. It's a moment of unity, gratitude, and peace. My grandmother Concepcion was very moved when I told her about what happened in the hospital. She held my hands, looked into my eyes with that wise look of someone who has lived a long life, and said, "I knew, my grandson, I always knew, that one day you would need that rosary, and Our Lady was waiting for you to ask her for help." That's when she told me the history of that rosary. It had belonged to her great-grandmother, passed down from mother to daughter through generations. It had accompanied difficult births, serious illnesses, moments of despair and joy. Each bead had been touched by hands that prayed with faith, that asked for protection, that gave thanks for miracles received. When she gave me the rosary, it wasn't a casual gesture. It was the continuation of a tradition of faith that now reached me.
Today, a few months later, I look back and see how God works in mysterious ways. If I hadn't gotten sick, I probably would never have discovered the power of prayer. If I hadn't gone through those moments of fear and vulnerability, I might never have opened my heart to such a profound spiritual experience. Grandmother Conception's rosary no longer stays in a drawer. It's always with me, in the car, in my jacket pocket, on my nightstand. It's my constant companion, my reminder that I'm never alone, that I can always count on the protection of Our Lady. Sometimes people ask me if I really believe it was a miracle, if it wasn't just coincidence or the effectiveness of medical treatments. I always answer the same thing. For those who have faith, no explanation is necessary. For those who don't have faith, no explanation is sufficient. I know what I felt. I know what I lived. I know that something supernatural happened in that hospital room. But the greatest miracle wasn't the physical healing. It was the spiritual transformation. It was discovering that faith is not a crutch for the weak, but a strength for those who want to live with purpose. It was understanding that prayer is not asking things from God, but opening one's heart to receive what He already wants to give us: love, peace, hope, strength to face challenges. Today, I know that the hand I felt on my shoulder wasn't a product of fever or medication. It was real. It was the hand of Our Lady, who through my grandmother's prayers, through the beads of that old rosary, through the love that spans generations, touched me and healed me. She healed me not only from COVID, but from spiritual coldness, from distance from God, from a life lived only on the surface. And you know what else strikes me? It's how the signs were always there, waiting for me to pay attention. My grandmother's faith, the rosary she gave me for when I needed it, the illness that forced me to stop and reflect on what truly matters. Everything had a purpose. Everything was part of a larger plan that I couldn't see when I was chasing after worldly things. Today, when I face difficulties, and they still exist because life hasn't become perfect, I hold my rosary and remember that night in the hospital. I remember the presence I felt, the voice I heard, the peace that flooded my heart, and I know that no matter what happens, I am not alone. Our Lady is with me, just as she is with each of us who has the humility to ask for her intercession. That's why I tell this story, not to convince anyone of anything, but to share an experience that changed my life. To say that sometimes God uses the most difficult situations to show us the way back home. To testify that faith is not something antiquated or outdated, but a living, present, transformative force. If you are going through a difficult time, if you're feeling afraid, if you are questioning whether God really cares about you, I want to tell you, He cares. He knows your story, your fears, your needs. And Our Lady, our Mother of Heaven, is always ready to intercede for us with her Son. Sometimes the answer comes spectacularly. Sometimes it comes in the silence of the heart. Sometimes through loved ones. Sometimes through simple objects that carry love and prayer. The important thing is to be open to receiving, to have the humility to acknowledge that we need help, to have the faith to believe that we are unconditionally loved. Conception's rosary remains with me, continues to be prayed with, continues to be a channel of communication with heaven. And I know that one day, when my time comes to leave this world, I will pass this rosary on to someone in my family, along with this story, along with the testimony that God is real, that Our Lady cares for us, that prayer has power. Because that's the beauty of faith. It multiplies when it is shared. It grows when it is witnessed. It strengthens when it is lived with love and gratitude. And I am certain that my story, like the stories of so many other people who have experienced the divine presence in their lives, can touch the heart of someone who needs to hear that they are not alone, that there is hope, that there is love, that there is always a light at the end of the tunnel. This is my story. This is my gratitude. This is my testimony.